Well, good morning and aloha. I didn't do that with the lilt either, but it certainly is that great word of welcome and friendship and that spirit that we have here in Hawaii. And so in that spirit of aloha, we extend greetings to all of you and a gratefulness that you're actually here with us. What an exciting opportunity this is, to have such a gathering as this. People coming from great distances for the same purpose, to spend some time learning from one another on the subject of how land forces can and are making a difference in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. So that's a great opportunity. I mean, that by itself is enough preamble to get us started, but I'm not going to spare you. I'm going to give you a little bit more preamble instead. Actually, it's my great honor to do that. It's really an honor to be here among so many colleagues assembled from a variety of corners: government, industry, academic. This is our third annual Land Forces of the Pacific Symposium, the 2015 edition of it, and that's a good thing by itself. It takes an idea, it takes some courage and some initiative to do it the first time. It takes commitment to do it a second time. It takes progress to do it a third time. And if you've done that, then you have a chance of making something last for a long time. And so we're excited that we're at this third Land Forces in the Pacific Symposium and Exposition. Now, as I mentioned, some of you are here as visitors, not from here in Hawaii, and again, we bring you in a ikoma mai, a welcome in the Hawaiian language, and a great hope that you'll come back again, because this is a great place to hold a conference like this. It's a great place to do it. We have tremendous venues like the one we're in here, and others that are around the area. So the right kinds of facilities in a very beautiful location, one cannot argue that, coupled with the spirit of aloha, that sets the tone for great events. But more importantly, when you come here to Hawaii, you have access to all of the components of the United States Pacific Command. And we do highlight that for the United States military and its geographic combatant commands, there is only one that has all of its components in the same place, and it's this one. So all of the headquarters that are subordinate to U.S. Pacific Command, the service components and functional component headquarters, are all right here, which means you can get a lot done in a short period of time in a very beautiful place. And that's a pretty good deal. So we hope that you'll come back and take advantage of that, and really want you to take advantage of it while you're here. So we've got lots to talk about this morning and throughout the rest of the week. I don't want to put us off schedule and off timeline, because I know that as we get into the panels, sometimes it's hard to make those things stop. We don't want them to stop, but we have to because of the pressures of time. And so I'm going to give back as much time as I can. And as a result, my remarks, I hope, will not be viewed as very long. But there are some things that I want to share with you and share some thoughts with you. I do want to begin by thanking General Sullivan. I think it's most appropriate that we do that. First, for his welcoming remarks that opened this symposium and exposition. But more importantly, because of what it is that the Association of the United States Army has done in creating this opportunity for us all. I would add that the work that General Sullivan and the Association of the United States Army team do on a day-to-day basis, first on behalf of the United States Army, but as you heard him say in his introduction, on behalf of land forces and land power. It's a tremendous contribution, and General Sullivan, we just appreciate your continued dedication and the way you love soldiers and soldiering, and thanks for doing that. The Institute of Land Warfare also, as a subset of the Association of the United States Army is really the key for putting together symposia and expositions like this. And I certainly want to thank Lieutenant General Roger Thompson and Lieutenant General Guy Swan, who are the key players at the corporate level. Thanks, gentlemen, for being here with us again, and thanks for your hard work to make this happen. So we're in our third year, and it's very clear from the trajectory that we're on that General Sullivan called this thing right 3 years ago by saying we ought to try this. We ought to try to bring this to Hawaii. It's a part of expressing this rebalance, this shift in our focus and in our weight to the Pacific, an area of great importance to the United States and every nation that's represented here as well. And so I'm excited. I really am. I'm excited about this land pack. Last year was my first experience. It was a great event, and I'm even more excited about what is ahead of us in this year's event. We continue to grow in scope. We also grow in relevance. And this conference, I'm convinced, will become the premier land-centric professional development event in the region as time goes on. We're not there yet, but we do have every expectation that we will get there. This year we have a wider array of presenters and panelists, and I would say also a more senior level of representation from regional countries, with 20 countries represented here this year. That's up from 13 last year. If you're measuring that by percentages, that's a pretty healthy percentage increase. More importantly, that's 7 more partners who are here this year that were not here last year. This includes 5 chiefs of army or chiefs of land forces from Brunei, Cambodia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and Singapore, and more than 50 different industry, academic, and military organizations being represented here. This is a very good mix for having good conversation about what land forces do in the Pacific. From the U.S. side, we have participants from the joint military community. That is all 3 land force contributors, department-level leaders for training and doctrine, for concept development, for global logistics, for science and technology, and for security assistance. That, too, is a very good array, an important group of teammates coming together. And so I'd say to all of you that your presence here is really a profound acknowledgement that land forces remain essential to security and stability in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. And I'm very confident that your time here is going to be well spent. So I do hope you'll take advantage of that. Now, this year's topic, which is on the front of your bulletin in a yellow banner right across the center of the front folder, could not be more relevant. And it is safe to say that we all seek to enhance the capabilities of our land forces through people, partnerships, and products. Let me talk about that just a little bit. The work we do has merit because of people. The people we lead in our land forces, the people we serve in our countries and in the region. It takes a team to do the work we do, work that is best done with partners, like those who are here for LandPac 2015, our friends from around the region, our partners from industry and academia, our partners from those department levels, our partners from the community, our partners from the Association of the United States Army. And continuing on this theme, and having highlighted the people and the partnerships, the third area through which we seek to enhance the capability of land forces is in products. Now, it's clear to me that the most valuable product of our land forces is the soldiers, the Marines, the special operators we train and lead. That's the most important product. And I would say that the inclusion of a senior enlisted panel this year, with attendance by the senior soldiers of several armies who are here, will bring out the importance of this valuable product, those we lead. And certainly also there are industrial products that enable our people and our partnerships. Many of those industrial products will be on display in the adjacent rooms, and you'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with industry about their industrial products. And finally, there are products of this LandPac Symposium and Exposition that further enhance the capabilities of our land forces. And those products are greater trust and channels of communication, key products for responding to the crises that emerge in our region, reducing the potential for miscalculation, and advancing both stability and prosperity in the region. So it makes sense. We're in the right place, at the right time, talking about the right things for the third year. And I know it's going to be a great professional development event. Now, as the senior U.S. Land Forces Commander and Joint Force Land Component Commander for U.S. Pacific Command, I'm honored to be the first of several speakers who will address you from this stage over the next few days. And each day we'll have a different plenary speaker to kind of get you started, get you thinking about the subjects that we're on from their perspective, and to help to set the tone for that day's discussions and topics. And this morning I want to share a few thoughts and observations, just a few points, about how land forces are engaged in the Pacific and how we operate. Since last year's LandPac Symposium, our land forces have been very active in trying to deepen regional understanding and building partner capacity through leader engagements, training exercises, and real-world humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations. The region continues to evolve politically and economically. Significant hazards remain where the potential of conflict is only a few missteps or miscalculations away. We should not lose sight of that. Significant hazards do remain. Whether we're talking about the North Korean Peninsula or North Korea on the Korean Peninsula, where a 62-year armistice continues to hold, but dangerous weapons that can threaten many, if not most, of the countries in this room continue to be produced, pursued, developed, and in some cases, proliferated. It could be that we're talking about the hazards that come from contested areas, undefined or ill-defined borders, where different views of sovereignty, national sovereignty, cause land forces to face one another. First, to signal resolve and to express commitment. But certainly in the minds of those land forces, to win if called upon to fight, something we don't want to see happen. Hazards also exist in the arena of natural disasters that claim more lives annually than any man-made activity. In a region that contains more than 50% of the world's population, inside of 17% of the world's land mass, yet faces more than 80% of the natural disasters that result in death to human beings. Our land forces have to be prepared to respond and provide relief and to resolve problems that emerge from these events. All of these examples signal the need for ready and capable land forces who are able to be where the situation unfolds and to join with like-minded, similarly committed partners to make a difference. Without a doubt, the intersecting array of exercises, exchanges, and conferences that form, I would say, the fabric of the military-to-military relationships in this region, these provide ample opportunity to create exciting experiences for our people, to strengthen our partnerships, and to produce security and trust at the same time. Over the last year since LandPact 2014, U.S. land forces from the Army, the Marine Corps, and the Special Operations Forces have been engaged throughout the region in bilateral events and increasingly in multilateral events. More than ever, we're coordinating our presence and our participation, leveraging the capabilities of one another, sharing resources to make those resources go further, so very important in a time where resources are in limited supply, and building collective readiness to respond to unforeseen requirements. And we've been operating more and more as a land component, building on the decision made by Admiral Sam Locklear in 2013 to establish a standing land component command with the intent of increasing cooperation among U.S. Pacific Command's land forces. We've seen an increase in land force participation in joint events beyond the land domain. An example I always like to call upon is the 2014 Rim of the Pacific maritime exercise, the world's largest maritime exercise, where unique land force capabilities were added to the joint team, providing value in the maritime domain. We've seen the introduction of an operation that we call Pacific Pathways that innovates the way we go to exercises in the region by connecting several exercises into a single operation, thus providing the United States with an extended presence and an increased number of land forces in the region, while building greater readiness at multiple echelons through each exercise, through each operation, leaving us with deeper relationships. Through Pacific Pathways, actually we just finished our second operation under this construct. Our cooperation within the land component and across the joint team has increased significantly. Army and Marine equipment moved together on a U.S. Navy cargo vessel, for example, to 3 different countries. We're talking people, partnerships, products. Beyond Pacific Pathways as an engine for changing the way we operate with land forces in the region, we've seen new opportunities for changing relationships among countries. Multilateral events are occurring more frequently, where before only bilateral events occurred in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. And frankly, that was all that was possible. Military-to-military engagements among the land forces of the Pacific are being acknowledged as the foundation to the national level relationships, the country-to-country relationships. And this is not to be underestimated. It's these connections among land forces, in some cases keeping together what is already a strained relationship among countries, or becoming a strong foundation upon which we build more when there is good cooperation among countries. It's this land force relationship that makes a difference in international relationships in this region. Opening doors that were previously closed and guarded, not to be opened. And now those doors are open. And we're seeing change as a result. We continue to observe disaster management exchanges and exercise. These events provide excellent venues to share the experiences that affect all of us in this region, but also to build multinational coordination that makes a difference when a disaster like the recent earthquakes that affected Nepal, India, Bhutan, China, losses of life, significant destruction. The response was enabled by the exercises that had been done in the time that preceded that disaster, that catastrophe. And I would add that engagements by all land force players, armies, Marines, special operations, and even police, created the initial posture for responding to this devastating earthquake. For the United States, Army Special Forces were already in Nepal, working with counterparts when the disaster struck. They were in place and ready to provide immediate support and relief, while the rest of the joint team, led by land forces, Marines, Army, supported by air forces, organized to reinforce that response effort from our perspective. This is an example, just one example, a very recent example of land forces and land force capabilities being complementary and connected and making a difference. So I'm excited about the opportunities that are emerging. Yes, there are threats and hazards. I've highlighted those, and there are many more. There's more uncertainty than ever. There are new dangers, like the growth of violent extremism linked to our home countries. But I sense that the overall trend is positive. The trend is toward greater cooperation that prevents miscalculation. The trend is toward more professional militaries emerging from the difficult days of internal violence toward credible external defenses that contribute to regional security and prosperity. The trend is toward countries and land forces working multilaterally to expand that fabric, the fabric of those who can respond in a time of need. There's a trend regarding technologies also. Technologies may help us do these things better. They are needed. And frankly, in my view, and I hope this will come up during the conference, I would submit that technologies must outpace the changing requirements that land forces have. Technologies have to be ready when we sense a need. And so they must outpace the demand signal, which can be risky when it comes to business. At the same time, we have to still emphasize that technologies are enhancements to land forces, not substitutes. And that trust and security can only come from people. So with that thought, I hope I've stimulated your thinking. Hopefully we got your juices flowing a little bit on the kinds of things that we have an opportunity to talk about this week. How are we going to advance ourselves? How are we going to advance our own capabilities? How are we going to capitalize on this positive trend? How are we going to get in front of the demand of land forces with our technologies? I do look forward to the panel discussions that are going to happen over the next few days. I had the privilege of reviewing all those as they were being built, and I've had discussions with all the panel leads. There are some great panelists that have been assembled here. The subjects are right on point. The people who are going to talk about the various subjects in the panel are truly experts in the business that they're going to bring to bear, and this is going to be really, really good. But it's also a chance for us to not only learn from each other, but a chance to grow. Grow in the way we work together, grow in the way we feel about one another, grow in trust and in partnership. So thanks again for being here. Thanks for your participation. For those that I know already, I look forward to spending some time and reacquainting. For those that we're seeing for the first time, I look forward to meeting you and getting to hear from you while you're here. And I do hope that you enjoy yourself and that you find this a very, very good week. So at this point, I'm ready to address any questions that anyone might have. All right, Mike, thanks. I hope they're all easy questions. If not, I'm going to defer them all to General Crutchfield. This first question has to do with the present and future engagement in the Nepal earthquake recovery. First, I will talk from the perspective of the Army. The Army has been part of a joint response that's been ongoing. Within U.S. Pacific Command, a decision was taken to create a joint task force that would be focused exclusively on the relief effort. And in doing so, to bring the authority to bear, the Pacific Command authority to organize contributions that would come in from the various parts of the joint community. And as I mentioned, that began with special forces on the ground, then was reinforced with assessment teams from our Marine forces in Okinawa, then was added to by Army capabilities on the ground and Air Force capabilities to build out what it is that we needed. We had sad loss of life that happened during that relief effort, where we lost 6 Marines and 2 of our Nepalese colleagues as well, sending a really, really hard message to us that even providing humanitarian relief can be costly, even more costly than the disaster. But beyond that, I would say that we are pretty much at the end of our initial relief efforts. There's been a great international response. Many of the countries in this room have provided capability that is making a difference for those countries. But there's a long way to go. So I would tell you that at this point we're at a transition point where the recovery operation and relief operations are really coming to a close, and now the extraordinarily hard work of reconstruction must begin. In the case of Nepal, which is the essence of this question, Nepal has demonstrated great resilience. I have to commend them for that. To have not only one large earthquake, but several aftershocks that would flatten cities around the world, adding to the complexity of the problem at a time when the weather pattern is changing, increasing the amount of landslides and mudslides, increasing flooding, making it more difficult to recover. And yet they've been resilient. So I do commend the Nepalese on what they've been able to accomplish so far. But it's very clear they've got a lot more work to do. And so that hard work is where we sense there may be opportunities for the land forces of the Pacific, and certainly those within U.S. Pacific Command, to provide some contributions. And that's in a physical sense. I'm not talking about a monetary sense. That contribution continues. But in a physical sense, of being present to help make a difference. And there are a number of things that might be considered. So the wide array of capabilities that exist in land forces, the things that are necessary to sustain ourselves, can also be used to assist others, whether it's construction or medical or various forms of engineering activity, civil affairs activity, communication activity. All these things are things that sustain land forces, and they can be brought to bear if that's what these governments, particularly Nepal, need help in. And so we don't have a specific set of future requirements at this point, but we do know we have a friend that is still in need, and that there will be opportunities for us to help as we go into the future. I hope that answers the question. There are some opportunities. I know some of the businesses here have capability as well, and many of you have already been engaged. And I would certainly encourage you to remain engaged, because there are things that you can bring to bear also that can make a difference. So, Mike, you have another one? Okay. Thank you. All right. This question has to do with the latest on force stationing footprint in Hawaii, and that's particularly with regard to our Army discussions that have happened here over the last 5 months. And the essence of the question is, can we expect to hold strength or reduce? All right, here we go. Who's got the crystal ball? Your expectation is that we will hold and build unless we lose the option of doing so through the application of sequestration. I can't be any more explicit about that. It's about losing options. If that can be relieved, then certainly our trend is very clear. Our national policies and our practical applications here are clearly toward the Pacific. In very recent days, our Secretary of Defense has been extremely clear about that. Extremely clear. Even with the pressures that exist in other parts of the world, we remain focused on and committed to our interests in the Pacific. So expect us to stay here unless we lose our choice. Now, that can take a number of forms, and obviously we've got a long way to go on what that will mean. If we have a loss of fiscal resources that limit our ability to maintain the forces we have, then a number of places must be considered as potential places for reductions. That's not a plan to reduce. Let's not have any mistake about that. That's a plan if we're required to reduce, what the options would be. And each option has to be weighed independently at the time. Okay, so I'm going to give you an optimistic story and tell you, watch what we're doing right now and see if that answers whether or not we're committed here. Okay? That's the way we're going to continue at a fast pace, heavy activity, coordinated across the land forces of the Pacific, engaged in the region, working with partners, and getting more out of every dollar resource we have. That's what we're going to do in the meantime until ordered to do otherwise. And then what we'll do is what we're ordered to do. So that's how I'd answer that question. I don't want to nuance that too much because it's not in our control to decide whether or not we will have the pressure to reduce or not. But it is in our control to commit ourselves the way we are right now. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So here's another one. Is the Indo-Asia-Pacific a future theater of expansion for Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and their ilk? Is there something about this theater that will prevent such expansion? This is a good question, and it's one that certainly concerns a number of the countries. I mentioned one of the emerging hazards that can be very dangerous, and that is the spread, the rise of violent extremism, certainly associated with these groups and what they offer. They do have strong narratives that are the most powerful lies in the world. no question. And it becomes attractive to some people who think that this is about strength, when in fact it's about death, destruction, and loss, and nothing more. And that's being revealed in a lot of places in the world. However, in the meantime, there are people from our own countries who are hearing that siren song and being attracted to the cause that Al-Qaeda claims to stand for, or that the Islamic State claims to stand for. In this region, there is good resilience to that. I've had discussions with many of the countries throughout the region, whether they're Islamic countries or non-Islamic majority countries, all have the same view, and that is that we don't want that to happen in our region. There's too much to lose. And each country is taking stock of what this means within their own country and how to work within the rule of law as it applies in those countries and within the expectations that exist in international law, to first be aware of the potential danger and then to do appropriate things to gain awareness, to counter that great lie, that narrative that seems to attract some, and to use the law to keep people who go anyway from being able to have a free ride back home, to engage in dangerous activities in our home countries. Every country has to assess this differently. Every country has to address it differently. But it will, like so many things, require a collective approach to create a term that I became familiar with a few years ago, and that is an inhospitable environment for this kind of activity. And so that part of the question that says, is there something about the region that can work against this? The answer is yes. The ability to work together, a different view that this is not a narrative that will fit in the Indo-Asia Pacific region. And that creates an inhospitable environment for these types of extreme behaviors and actors to either come back and act out or come back and hide. It cannot be hospitable for either of those alternatives. And so, I know that that's an important topic. I was at a similar symposium from another one of our land force colleagues, that's the Special Operations Community, just last week. And several of the countries here were represented at that also. And this was the Pacific Special Operations Conference that occurs each year now. And it was talking about this, about how to counter the rise of violent extremism. It's going to take cooperation. It'll take sharing of information. It'll take reinforcing one another. And that's what I think is ongoing right now. So I remain optimistic while acknowledging the hazard that's out there, and I appreciate that question. Next one. Where do you see potential for land force cooperation and collaboration with the People's Liberation Army? Interestingly, that's a question we get very frequently, so I certainly am happy to address it. We have relationships with every country in this room and with many more who are not in this room. And we send out invitations to events like this or the Pacific Army's Chiefs Conference that's coming up here in a few months in Bali, Indonesia. Pacific Army's Management Seminar that we hold every year, that most recently we did in Bangladesh. We send out invitations to remain engaged. And the People's Liberation Army is always included in those invitations. So that's the first thing I would say. We want them to be in venues like this for all the reasons that I've already talked about. Now, on a more precise basis, the kinds of opportunities we've had for cooperation, very encouraging. The opportunities are increasing. And this is guided by a national level discussion and top level leadership that says, we want you to work together. That's the bottom line. And so we're taking advantage of that strategic direction and guidance to do exactly that. At the present time, the majority of our land force engagements are in the arena of humanitarian assistance and disaster response. That's where the most robust engagements are. There are a few other areas where we're allowed to cooperate, and those occur also, but at a lower pace. And we're governed by, for the United States, the National Defense Authorization Act of the year 2000, which tells us what we can do at the present. And as I've said in many venues, I'm of the opinion that we have more than adequate latitude within that set of authorities to do quite a bit of engagement. And so that's what we're doing. Best examples this recent year since our last land pact, there are two that I'd like to highlight. The first was a disaster management exercise and exchange. It was the second year in a row that we had a physical component of that with our soldiers side by side on the ground. The first one was done in Hawaii in late 2013. And this one was done in January of this current year, 2015, in the Guangzhou military region on Hainan Island in China. It was led principally by the Guangzhou military region and their soldiers and capabilities, including some of their national level responders. And we brought a joint team that was comprised of all of the components of PACOM, also things like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, also the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, the team we bring to a disaster response. And we spent a good period of time on the ground together, and we learned a lot from each other, side by side, with everything from academic seminars to command post exercises to practical exchanges on rubble piles, collapsed houses. And we had a conversation then that we would meet in other places in this region in a time of crisis. And the more we do exercises like this, the better it is for the region, the better it is for the response. Right now we're adjacent to a sector that's been assigned under Chinese lead in Nepal. We're adjacent units providing relief in a third country. We have to keep doing things like this. I think it's important to the region also. Many of the countries in the region have shared with me that they have a view that's very important, that the United States have an evident positive relationship with China. And that's good. Second example from this year. We were asked by Australia, and Gus Gilmore actually passed this message to us, asked to consider participating in an event that had been bilateral, that became trilateral over the past year. The exercise is called Kowari. It's a survival exercise in very austere conditions in the Western Australian outback with Australian experts on survival. In this case, we had a total of 30 participants. Small exercise, but very important. 10 came from Australia. 10 came from the People's Liberation Army. 5 came from the United States Marine Corps. 5 came from the United States Army. And this demanded not only military hardihood among the men and women who participated among those 30, but it required trust to be built. Trust that is necessary to survive. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. So it's a great venue. Gus, we appreciate the invitation for that, and we're very glad that we participated. So there are things like this, big ones that have hundreds of soldiers together, like the Disaster Management Exchange, and small ones that have 30 men and women on the ground doing exchanges. That's where the opportunity is, and that's kind of the thrust of where we are. We know, and we are not ignoring the fact that there are significant challenges as well in other arenas. We cannot ignore that fact. We don't hide from that when we have a conversation with the People's Liberation Army. I just hosted a lieutenant general from the Chengdu military region just last week here in Hawaii. He came through for a visit. We can have good conversations about this, but we want the relationship to be a big one and a robust one that can weather the difficult challenges that are still unaddressed. It has to be that. This has to be an example of what I spoke of earlier, of military to military and land force to land force connections becoming a foundation for national level relationships. This is one of those examples. So that's the answer to that question. I think I have one more up here. No. Mike, any more? I think we'll try to make these the last two unless there are a few more. So if you have some more, go ahead and raise them up, and Michael can collect those, and we'll address these last two. This question has to do with what we call total force policy. That's the recognition that certainly in the United States Army and across other services as well, we have an active component and a reserve component. And in the case of the United States Army and the United States Air Force, that reserve component is a federal reserve and a National Guard that's associated with each state. So in regards to total force policy, what is your current assessment of reserve component support to U.S. Army Pacific exercises and your vision for the way ahead? That's another question that I love to answer. I love to talk about that a lot, and so I'll try not to go too long on it. But what another great news story this is. I mentioned the exercises with the People's Liberation Army. National Guard was there. Army Reserve was there. Air Force National Guard was there. Air Force Reserve was there. Active Marines were there. Active Navy was there. Active Army was there. Friends, that's total force, okay? And so we want to demonstrate total force application over and over again and get good at it. There are other examples. I mean, certainly we have things like the National Guard State Partner Program that's administered by U.S. Pacific Command, and the components, like my component, works very closely to coordinate those activities and make sure they connect. That's very important first so that we're going somewhere in terms of what we're committing by the United States, but frankly, it's really important to the countries that receive our capabilities at their request so that we don't overwhelm them, so that it makes sense for the countries that we're working with. And so we have great cooperation that's happening with our reserve forces. There are other opportunities. I'm going to give you an example of one that's unfolding today while we're in this room. We had a very strong typhoon that, as we see frequently, cut across the north corner of Guam and then turned and affected a bit of Saipan just within the last few days. We're thankful that the destruction wasn't greater because it looked like it was going to be a really bad one. It was bad enough, though, that it required some debris removal in a concentrated way that was going to exceed the capacity of local authorities. We have Army Reserve forces that live in Guam, and we committed those to action yesterday in response to a request by our Joint Region Commander down there, who isn't concerned about what uniform there is. She's more concerned about who can help. So our approach to joint operations necessitates also our approach to total force application, and it's working. Now, sometimes it looks different. I can tell you that the Association of the United States Army fights a good fight for us, as there are very different pressures in Washington on how the various components should or shouldn't work together, how they should or should not be resourced. And we're grateful that we don't have to engage in those conversations at this end. You know, out here, for the land forces in the Pacific, it's about demonstrating. Show me how it works. Show me how the policy can be used when there's provisions for using reserve forces without mobilization, for example. Demonstrate it, and that's what we do here. So that was one. The next question, I see a few more that are out there. Mike, there's a few more cards that are coming up. If we can grab those, and then we'll finish it. This question has to do with a topic we call activity sets. So I'll need to address that for a second. But the question is, what is the best forum to discuss the benefits of activity sets with partners? So I'll address the question directly. That is, anytime we have a chance for conversation, that's the best venue. We ought to just have a conversation about it. So let me have a conversation with you. Since the question was asked, I'll give the response. That makes it two-way, that makes it a conversation. Activity sets are a term that describes equipment, equipment that is positioned in a place where we think it can make a difference in our relationship or in our response. It's really that simple. It's putting the gear where it would need to be so we don't lose time and don't waste costs if we're going to be there frequently for exercises, or if we know we're going to respond to a disaster, or if we want to demonstrate our commitment to an alliance that requires reinforcement. And it can be any one of those. So this full array of putting the right kinds of equipment in the right places around the world is something that we're looking at within the United States Army. In the Asia-Pacific region, we are mostly interested in finding places to position humanitarian assistance and disaster response equipment sets. Sets that can shorten the response time. Sets that can provide relief there, if that happens to be the place where an incident occurs. Remember, we talk about time is often measured by distance and the requirements it takes to close the distance. That's what we see in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. It's a big area. And for any of us to help one another, unless we are immediately adjacent neighbors, we have a distance to travel. And often it requires either airlift or sea lift. There's some that can be done by land movement as well, but for the most part, for any one of us to help someone else, it's going to be an airlift or sea lift. That's costly in terms of time. That's costly in terms of money. And more importantly, during a disaster, it's costly in terms of the effectiveness of the response. So if we're thoughtful and can have a conversation about where equipment could be positioned, U.S. equipment could be positioned that could shorten response, then that can help the whole region. And we'll have that conversation one country at a time, because it's up to the countries that we would ask. It's not for ours to decide. It's a conversation we must have with the countries, because this is U.S. equipment, but it's on sovereign territory of one of our friends. And we'll be sensitive to that, and I can assure you of that. All right, Mike, I saw you pick up a couple more, and then we'll roll it up. Thanks, sir. So what role can land forces play, or can land forces have in reducing maritime threats, especially in areas where we know we have some contested issues: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam. And the question is about China's aggressive actions. Okay, so let me characterize it this way first. You know that we seek to work with China as it continues to grow and emerge. Every country in this room has a key economic connection to China. In other cases, you have a key cultural or historic connection to China. So we're not going to ignore China, as I've already mentioned. And yet, as I acknowledge, there are some friction points, especially for several of the countries that were named in this question. So what land forces can do first is work with our partners in each one of those countries to make sure they have capacity to be able to address something that they would view as a security concern for their own country. You know, we have to be able to have discussions and even create conditions for change in the world where everyone is in a position of strength. That's the ideal. Because when there's measured strength, there's deterrence. When there's measured strength, there is respect. And frankly, when there's conversation that goes with that measured strength, there's opportunity to build relationships. And so we're going to work with the countries that were addressed here and others who want us to work with them on several measures. One is to help them with their own capacity, as I mentioned, but also where it's useful to help carry on the conversation or create the opportunities for conversation. Now, we're like anyone else, so we have imperfect relationships. We have an imperfect relationship with China. Some of the countries named here have relationships with China. Theirs too are imperfect. We have to work through it. That's what the human domain is all about. We have to work through our challenges and create the best opportunity to do that. So that's what I think land forces can do. I think they can make a big difference. I do think that's, and the question also includes maritime environments. I talked about our participation in Rim of the Pacific. Oh, by the way, China was in that too. Land forces can make a difference in maritime environments as part of that expression of defense and deterrence. We never want to get to the point where you have to fight and win. It's not going to be in anyone's interest. We want to be in a condition where you don't have to fight and win, but you're still strong. I think that's a better condition to be in. Then we can make different discussions about what our strength needs to be and how it looks. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue to work with our maritime partners. We're going to continue to work with countries who want to work with us. We're going to continue to have dialogue where possible with China to make sure we're not misunderstanding each other's intentions, that we understand the intention. There's a point I'd make on this, and I've said this in several public events, including when I addressed the National Defense University of the People's Liberation Army in Beijing a few months ago. I had that great privilege to do that. And I said that the likelihood of us getting it wrong is very high. We're going to get it wrong because we don't see the world the same way. We have a different view. And so we will look at exactly the same thing and have two completely different impressions of it. And if we stop at that point in our conversation, we are in very serious trouble. And so the challenge for us is to take another step closer beyond the first reflex of, I don't know why you're doing this, but I don't like it. We must take a step beyond that, have a conversation. Why are you doing this? Get the conversation going. Then take one more step and see if we can resolve the implications of the actions being taken by either side. So I don't want to single out China only. There are actions the United States takes that others are not sure about either. The same dynamic must occur. Last question here is, this is hearkening back to last year. So some of you were here last year, you may remember this. But since I'm becoming senile, I will dig into my memory banks. Actually, I do remember this. The question is about something we established called an Emerging Capabilities Coordination Cell. I first talked about that at the Armed Forces Communication Association event that was held here in Hawaii. And the question is, can you bring us up to date with respect to this Emerging Capabilities Coordination Cell? Yes. I would tell you that the cell members are inside of the room. If I can ask all of you to just stand up for our members of the Emerging Capabilities Coordination Cell, please stand up. So identify them here. Got a few of them. There'll be a few more that come in and out through the week. Thanks, gentlemen. You can have a seat. This cell is our attempt within U.S. Army Pacific to create a structure that is constantly looking at the present and the future with regard to capabilities that either exist and might be applied in a different way, or that are emerging to help keep industry out in front of our demand. We call it the EC3 because we like words like that, but it's the Emerging Capabilities Coordination Cell, and I think its name is probably more useful than its acronym. Emerging capabilities, things that are coming. Coordination. Let's pull it together in a way that makes a difference, whether we want to do experimentation with those capabilities now, whether we want to be, like I've described, the world's largest battle lab for evaluation and learning, just by observing the work we're doing, or whether it's a matter of simply taking the lessons we learn and informing our good friends like General Dave Perkins from the Army Training and Doctrine Command, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster from Army Capabilities Integration Center. And you'll hear from both of them here over the coming days. So this is what the Emerging Capabilities Coordination Cell is doing for us. It harnesses the best of the research, development, and acquisition community, ties it with the operating community, and helps to find ways to accelerate the implementation of some of these capabilities into our day-to-day practice. And obviously this can be beneficial for industry. If you want to know who to talk to, it's those folks that I had stand up. If you want, as one of our regional countries and partners, to know what are we learning, then let's have a conversation, either directly or through the Emerging Capabilities Coordination Cell. And we're delighted to share what we're learning, because it applies to you too. With that, folks, I thank you very much for the great privilege of starting us off. Look forward to chatting with you as we go out there. Have a great conference, and thanks for being here once again. Mahalo and aloha.